Livingston, the leader of the GLC.
There was a hero's welcome for Mr Livingston when he spoke at a GLC-sponsored rally against racism.
If you go on like that, I'll think it's the House of Lords again or something.
His new challenge to the government came later.
We've made it quite clear we aren't prepared to accept another year in office by courtesy of Mrs Thatcher and her government. If they did extend that, the life of the present administration, then I think that virtually every Labour member would stand down and fight a by-election. Now, I've already picked up that a lot of Conservative members here will do the same. So there's no way this government can avoid elections.
From the platform, Mr Tony Benn supported the campaign against abolition.
I wouldn't pay too much attention to the House of Lords, but I tell you what I would pay a lot of attention to, and that is what happens when a large number of determined people, black and white, old and young, women and men, run a campaign that carries public support.
Praising the council's fight against racism, rock star Stevie Wonder gave a whole new meaning to the initials GLC.
So I would like to, if I may, say to me also, the GLC means to me, God's living children.
Not surprisingly, the government's feelings towards the GLC this evening are considerably less affectionate. Ministers are spending the next few days reflecting and discussing what to do next after this week's painful defeat. And the whips have already begun to sample opinions from MPs and, of course, more importantly, from Tory lords. Mr Livingston's threat of by-elections pose a dilemma for Conservatives who must now decide whether or not to oppose him. Ministers will seek to get him to justify the cost. Keeping the existing GLC and metropolitan county councils in power for an extra year with financial restrictions on their spending remains the likeliest option tonight. Keeping the councils, but only until the abolition bill is passed, would need interim replacement authorities, and Tory rebels oppose them. Holding next year's elections as scheduled is still bitterly opposed by the government, and another option that emerged today, rushing through the abolition bill before next May's scheduled elections, is this evening being described by some ministers as probably too risky. The Environment Secretary, Mr Jenkin, is likely to meet the Prime Minister early next week to assess all options. Some of those closest to him are reassured by Mrs Thatcher's indication of full support for her Secretary of State and for a policy that's always had her personal stamp of approval.
Scotland Yard detectives who are carrying out inquiries in Spain are believed to be investigating 5 men wanted in connection with 2 of Britain's biggest armed robberies. According to a Spanish police chief, the men from the London area are known and under constant surveillance, but they can't be sent back to face charges because there's no extradition treaty between Britain and Spain. One crime is said to be the robbery on Easter Monday last year at the Security Express offices in Shoreditch when £7 million were stolen in used banknotes. The other, the Heathrow warehouse robbery last November, when 3 tons of gold bars worth £25 million were taken. In Bolivia, the country's president, Hernan Suazo, has been released unharmed after being kidnapped. Reports suggest he was taken from his home in La Paz by armed police in an abortive coup attempt. President Suazo was Bolivia's first freely elected leader for 19 years, when he came to power in 1982. Up till then, Bolivia had had 10 presidents in 4 years. But the main role in politics has always been played by the military, and the coup would seem to have failed because they were unwilling to support the kidnappers. Most Bolivians were unaware of today's events. The Cyprus to Lebanon ferry, intercepted by an Israeli gunboat yesterday in international waters, has now reached its destination, but without 9 of its 65 passengers. The Alisur Blanco was stopped on the way from Larnaca to Beirut and escorted to Haifa, where the passengers were questioned. When the ship was released, 1 Syrian and 8 Lebanese were kept in Israel. Emergency measures have been introduced in South Wales to cope with the worst drought there this century. Hosepipes have been banned in most areas, and 1 prosecution for a breach of the order is going ahead soon. Today, the Welsh Water Authority began pumping 5 million gallons of water a day from the River Wye to ensure supplies to factories in South Wales.
As the hot, dry spell continues, reservoirs in South Wales are either empty or so low they can't cope with the daily demands of the densely populated area. An emergency pumping system is being set up on the banks of the River Wye. Standby reservoirs have also been brought into service, and only if it rains continually between now and the autumn will Wales avoid dry taps. The Water Authority is asking everyone for voluntary cutbacks before enforcing legal restrictions.
Customers are reminded that a hose pipe ban is currently in force in this area. The maximum fine on conviction for improper use is £400.
People that use hose pipes, you know, well, they're just idiots in my opinion, knowing the situation that we're in. To use hose pipes is absolutely ridiculous. Water you were putting on a garden today will be taken out of a child's mouth tomorrow. This is the way I look at it, and this is how serious the situation is.
Now today's sport, and a triumph for England's cricket hero, but a disaster for its tennis heroine. Michael Blakey has the news and action from Lord's, the Curragh and Wimbledon.
Virginia Wade is out of the women's singles at Wimbledon. She was beaten by a player ranked only 182nd in the world, Carina Karlsson of Sweden. After knocking out the number 5 seed, Miss Wade was expected to win today against the young Swedish girl who had to qualify for the tournament.
Yes, it's good.
In the final set, Miss Wade fought her way to a 5-3 lead.
Well played.
But Miss Karlsson showed courage, skill and temperament. Miss Wade's game wilted and she found herself trailing by 10 games to 9. And after 2¼ hours, Miss Wade, who'd squandered several chances of winning, went out of the 3rd round of her 23rd Wimbledon.
And she's done it.
Miss Karlsson won 6-2, 4-6, 11-9. 17-year-old Annabel Croft took 7 games from Chris Lloyd before losing in straight sets to the second favourite. Score 6-3, 6-4. But Joe Dury is through to the last 16 after beating Kim Steinmetz in straight sets. Miss Dury now plays Steffi Graf, the 15-year-old German who knocked out Sue Barker. The youngest player in the men's singles, the 16-year-old German Boris Becker, had to retire after twisting his ankle, so his opponent, Bill Scanlon, goes through to meet John McEnroe. McEnroe won easily, but when behind on his service, complained that the balls weren't the right shape.
Every one of them are lopsided.
He may have been joking, but at the end of the game, the umpire, Mr. Bob Jenkins, made sure, just in case. And there'll be full coverage of today's play in Wimbledon 84 on BBC1 after this news. Ian Botham took 8 wickets in the second Cornhill Test at Lord's to give England a first innings lead of 41 runs. It's the best performance by an England bowler against the West Indies for a decade. David Cass reports.
Ian Botham had taken all 3 West Indies wickets which fell yesterday, but his dismissal of his best friend, Viv Richards, was a controversial LBW. Botham had stifled his appeal and it seemed the ball was missing leg stump. Jeff Dujon had scored only 8 when he made a rash stroke at the bouncer and Fowler took the catch. Bob Willis bowled superbly and was unlucky when substitute fielder Don Topley held a wonderful catch off balance and stepped over the boundary. There was no question, though, when Botham trapped West Indies captain Clive Lloyd, LBW. And he knew he was playing with all the old fire and on the point of making history again. Roger Harper fell for 8, the 7th wicket for Botham. Then he ended the innings with Joel Garner's wicket. West Indies were 245 all out. England led by 41 runs on first innings, but have made a poor start to their second. Tomorrow's a rest day, but the match is wide open.
El Gran Senor, narrowly beaten in the derby at Epsom, redeemed his reputation in the Irish derby at the Curragh. In the finishing straight, Pat Edery in the white cap brought him through the field to win.
Under 3 furlongs to run in the sweeps derby. Telios from Long Pond, Rainbow Quest, Daha. Then comes El Gran Senor. And Rainbow Quest is going on now at the 2 furlong marker. Steve has gone for home, but El Gran Senor is breathing down his neck. It's Rainbow Quest from El Gran Senor. Then comes Telios. Coming to the furlong pole, Rainbow Quest from El Gran Senor being kicked on now by Pedro Reed's El Gran Senor from Rainbow Quest as they race up towards the line. El Gran Senor has certainly superiority. He wins it in tremendous style. Rainbow Quest is second, Tahar is third.
What's been billed as the largest children's party in the world has taken place in Birmingham to celebrate 100 years of the NSPCC. Paul McRae joined the festivities.
88,000 Birmingham school children were invited to the party. There was no entry fee and free crisps for the under-11s. The event had been organised by local scouts and guides. The aim, to celebrate the centenary of the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. All the money from the funfair went to the charity, though those young prospectors panning for copper were allowed to keep what they found. It's reckoned around 20,000 boys and girls came to the party, advertised as the biggest in the world. That may or may not have been the case, but the party givers are claiming one record, the largest ever Ring-a-Ring-a Roses, made up of 2,500 little ones.
And that's all from Michael and me on 1, but I'll be back with the late news on 2 at 25 to 12. Good night.
Good evening to you. To all intents and purposes, I think tomorrow will be very similar to today. In fact, nothing's changing really on the chart. We're going to keep this high pressure to the west of us, low pressure to the east, and that means these cool northerly winds sandwiched in between. There will be one minor variation, and we can pick it out most of all, I think, on the satellite picture, because you can see that there's a bank of cloud to the north of the country, and that's going to be moving into these northern parts. In fact, there's a fair bit of cloud around over Scotland at the moment. Southern parts, though, settling into a fine, dry and quite clear night. It's of interest to note that there are some thunderstorms further to the south, but don't worry about them, they're certainly not coming our way. And in fact, as far as this country is concerned, tomorrow the southernmost parts will have another dry day, a fair bit of sunshine, I think. The best of the sunshine probably in southwestern parts. Temperatures, though, still not up to par, 18 to 20 degrees centigrade. That's the middle to upper 60s Fahrenheit. As we head further and further north, so we run into that patchy cloud. In northern England and Northern Ireland, though, you'll still have some brightness, you'll probably still have some sunshine, but just here and there, there will be 1 or 2 light showers, especially in the northeast of England. But over much of Scotland, I think the cloud will be thicker, rather more persistent. Again, just a little brightness, but many places staying fairly cloudy. And in the northeast of Scotland especially, there'll be some showers.
Some highlights for Sunday evening on BBC1. At 7:15, Bobby Deerfield, starring Al Pacino and Marta Keller, is about meeting someone, losing someone, and finding yourself.
I don't know what you're thinking.
You know what I'm thinking now?
What?
I would like you to hold me.
Then at 9:30, the That's Life team mount a competition to rival the Come Dancing finals with their own Come Lawnmower Dancing Championships. That's followed at 10:15 by Omnibus. The programme comes from Vienna, where Richard Baker reports on the abrupt departure of the American conductor Lorin Maazel from his post as director of the Vienna State Opera and the intrigue and infighting that accompanies the Viennese way of music. Some highlights for Sunday evening on BBC1.
BBC Two now rejoins the Thames Valley Police in their day-to-day work, which this week involves a petrol station robbery. Here on BBC1, Match of the Day at Wimbledon 84.
Good evening. The first week of Wimbledon is over, a week in which the British weather and women players have done us proud. Tonight, a glimpse of the off-court match that will almost certainly make the news tomorrow morning. But first, the tennis. With Anne Hobbs already into the last 16 of the women's singles, 3 other British girls were trying to join her today. First in action was the number 10 seed, Jo Jury. Her opponent, Kim Steinmetz of the USA. Jo went safely through in 2 sets.